We now come to the statements. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I would like to make a statement to update the House on the Infected Blood inquiry. The Government welcomes the publication of the Infected Blood inquiry's second interim report. I'd like to thank Sir Brian Langstaff and all those who have contributed. The Infected Blood inquiry has done a huge amount of work on an intensely complex issue, ensuring that victims' voices are heard. I've been deeply moved by the testimonies outlined in the latest report, and the victims' bravery in coming forward should not be overlooked. The issuing of the second interim report, specifically on compensation, was not anticipated by the Government until we were informed by the inquiry in February this year. However, we very much appreciate and welcome Sir Brian taking this approach. The Government is considering intensely the recommendations outlined in this report, and work is underway at pace across all relevant departments to respond fully. My right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, announced the Infected Blood inquiry in 2017 to examine the circumstances that led to individuals being given contaminated blood and blood products in the UK. The inquiry, chaired by Sir Brian Langstaff, commenced on the 2nd of July 2018, and I'd like to reiterate our total endorsement for my right honourable friend's point that the contaminated blood scandal of the 70s and 80s should simply never have happened. In tandem with the ongoing inquiry, my right honourable friend, the member for Portsmouth North, as the then Paymaster General, commissioned Sir Robert Francis KC to produce a compensation framework study in anticipation of a recommendation from the inquiry to set up a compensation scheme. The findings of this study were published in June 2022. Shortly after this, Sir Brian published his first interim report of the Infected Blood inquiry in July 2022. In his report, Sir Brian recommended that the Government make interim payments to infected individuals and their bereaved partners. The Government accepted this recommendation in full on the 17th of August 2022, and interim compensation payments of £100,000 have been paid to those infected individuals and their bereaved partners registered with existing support schemes. As I said to the House in December, we have much to do, and I wish to assure the House that this is a priority for the Government and we will continue to progress it. Those are my words in December, and I would like to assure the House that this commitment absolutely remains. Sir Brian's most recent report sets out what the inquiry recommends as an appropriate means of compensating both those infected and affected, and the mechanism for delivering that compensation. In doing so, it sets out the complexity of what is a multi-layered issue. The recommendations in his report outline that those infected and affected should be granted legal support, and infected and affected people and the estates of infected people should be able to claim for categories of loss against 5 awards: Injury Impact Award, Social Impact Award, Autonomy Award, Care Award and Financial Loss Award. This is rather than claiming on individual assessment of each application. In addition, those dissatisfied with their compensation payments should have redress through an appeal to a structure outside of the compensation scheme. The report has also proposed mechanisms Sir Brian thinks would ensure the fairness of the compensation scheme. He has recommended that a scheme is administered by an arm's-length body, chaired by a High Court judge or equivalent, and advised by legal and medical professionals, as well as the beneficiaries of the scheme. In addition to this, Sir Brian has proposed that the route through the courts should still remain open to beneficiaries. Sir Brian has agreed with much of Sir Robert's study, though there are also differences in approach. For example, Sir Robert outlined in his study that the scheme should be delivered locally in each of the 4 nations, as this was the preference of the victims. Sir Brian has recommended that the scheme is delivered by a central body, whilst continuing the support provided by the existing infected blood support schemes, which should be continued and guaranteed for life by legislation or secure government undertaking. There is also divergence in the consideration of scope of those eligible for compensation payments, including the extension of payments to those with hepatitis B and not providing payments to the estates of those affected. Sir Brian's interim report is detailed. It is only right that the Government will need to consider the complexities they set out thoroughly when preparing our response. The House will recognise that health is a devolved matter, and I'll be discussing the report with my colleagues in the devolved administrations. As I said at the start of my statement, the Government welcomes the publication of the Infected Blood Inquiry's second interim report to assist its ongoing work. However, we do not underestimate the complexity of these recommendations, which do need careful consideration. For example, Sir Brian recommends that an arm's-length body, in which His Majesty's Government would have no ongoing role beyond providing taxpayer funds as required by the body. On anything like this scale, this would be a new departure and does have implications for accountability of government, which will need careful consideration alongside how its financial implications will be managed. I would, however, like to reassure the House that while the Government is progressing work to ensure that we are in the best possible position to respond fully at the end of the inquiry, every recommendation by Sir Brian, including in relation to timing and a further interim payment, is receiving intense focus. My colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care are aware of the issues Sir Brian has raised in relation to psychological support. Under the current psychological support scheme for England, there is provision for a grant of up to £900 a year for established beneficiaries and family members for counselling and talking therapy. The Department for Health and Social Care is undertaking research to look at the psychological support needs so that decisions on commissioning of bespoke service are based on robust evidence and meet the requirement. In closing, I would like to reiterate the need for pace. People die every week as a result of the impact of the scandal. This Government wants to deliver resolution, and we are working at pace across all relevant departments to consider the recommendations as outlined in this latest report and to ensure we are best placed to respond to the inquiry's final report. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Paymaster General for providing an advanced copy of his statement. I'd like to begin by paying tribute to the brave victims and their families who, whilst working through their own personal ill health, grief and trauma, have campaigned tirelessly for justice. Without their strength, we would not have reached this stage. And of course to my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Hull North, who's been a stalwart of the success of this campaign so far. The continued work of the Infected Blood Inquiry is crucial to ensuring that victims' voices are heard. I had the privilege of meeting with victims of this scandal last month, and their stories will stay with me forever. No one should have to experience the pain and anguish they have faced and are still facing. Justice delayed, continuing to be delayed, is justice denied. While we await the conclusion of the report and inquiry, those who are given contaminated blood products are dying at a rate of 1 every 4 days. Families have suffered decades of health issues, financial loss and stigma. Victims, those affected and infected, will have watched the Minister's statement today with heavy hearts and disappointment and some degree of anger. There seems to be no commitment from the Minister to respond to the second report until the final report is published in the autumn. The interim report was published so that the Government doesn't have to wait and to take action until the final report. Exactly. Whilst we all understand the complexities of this scandal, I hope the Minister can see that many individuals directly affected still feel angry and unrecognised. Yeah. Today's statement does not provide any certainty for families or children of victims. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have 5 questions for the Minister to finish with. First, does he agree with Sir Brian's statement in the interim report that time without redress is harmful? No time must be wasted in delivering that redress. And can he confirm that the intense focus that he's talked about being done now is to achieve the recommendation in the report that the scheme is set up now and should begin work this year? Second, how can he provide more reassurance to family members of victims, including parents who lost children and children orphaned when their parents died? Third, the Paymaster General talked about work underway. If the Government plans to accept these interim findings, officials must start now verifying, registering directly affected people and their families urgently to understand the size of the group and to speed up the payments. Can he confirm whether this is already taking place? Fourth, will he commit to more regular updates on the progress and direction of travel on this issue ahead of the inquiry's final report later this year? We shouldn't have to keep squeezing this information out of the Government because it compounds the pain of the victims. And finally, will he agree to meet with me and my right honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so that we can work together to deliver the justice the victims deserve.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her remarks. She was right to pay tribute to many MPs in this House, including the Right Honourable Lady and my Right Honourable friend, who have really campaigned tirelessly on this over a long period of time. I'm grateful for the work of the APPG. And I'd also actually mention some of the members of the media who've actually been absolutely at the forefront of pushing this for a long period of time. But above all, the Honourable Lady is right to refer to the victims. And I know, I'm very conscious of the fact that there will be tens of thousands of people watching this statement today who are desperate to see a resolution of this. Every time there is another iteration, every time there is a cause for me to be in this place, it is a source of anxiety and of concern and of worry and of, I'm afraid, I'm sure, disappointment every time there is another statement and we don't have the final resolution. What I would say is we've travelled a long way. So it was 6 years ago this was announced. It was 5 years ago that Sir Brian started work. I'm very, very grateful to Sir Brian for producing this interim report. A lot of it is very similar to Sir Robert Francis' report, though there are differences. We do need to do the work. So on the points that the Honourable Lady raises, we've been focused on ensuring that at the conclusion of Sir Brian's inquiry, we're able to come forward in the very best place, the best place possible to do it. That does not preclude doing something earlier if we are able and have the means to do it. Registration is not as yet taking place, but I'm absolutely mindful of the fact that whereas for the previous interim payment there was a defined set of people and bereaved partners, were that recommendation to be taken forward, that requires registration, and that inevitably takes time, as we are all aware. I absolutely will continue to, although honourable members, right honourable members will be aware that this is no more than an update statement. I was keen to come to this House to hear the views of honourable members, and I commit to do so again as appropriate as we continue through this process, and work will continue. And of course it would be a pleasure to meet the Honourable Lady and the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy if they'd like to meet to discuss this.
Chair of the Health Select Committee, Steve Bryan.
Thank you very much. In his second interim report, Sir Brian Langstaff makes it clear that the government has everything it needs to implement the compensation framework now, and to repeat the Shadow Minister's quote that she's pulled out from the report, very pertinent: time without redress is harmful. I would suggest that is rather underplaying it. Time without redress, people are passing away. Currently, Madam Deputy Speaker, these infected blood support schemes make regular ex gratia payments to those who are infected and bereaved partners. Will the government make this provision statutory?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question, and I don't dispute for a second the comments that have been of Sir Brian that has been referred to by my honourable friend and the Honourable Lady, that time without redress is harmful. We want to see progress on this, which is why we are working at pace to deliver it. Sir Brian makes a specific recommendation that the ongoing ex gratia payments should be put on a statutory basis or receive a similarly strong government commitment. I'm not in a position to respond to recommendations today. It's been 8 working days since the report landed, but all of these recommendations will be taken very seriously.
SNP spokesperson Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I put on the record my gratitude for advance sight of the statement today, and also for the work of the Infected Blood Inquiry. I suspect there will be a considerable amount of consensus in the House on this issue. I have, over the years, been appalled at the personal testimony I've heard from my constituents, their 40 years of struggle, and the realisation that this scandal could have affected any one of us. It is a tragedy which simply should never have happened, and it has been made worse by decades of delay, first in preventing further use of contaminated factor products, in identifying victims, and then in delivering compensation. And as we know, the infected blood scandal took place before devolution, while healthcare in Scotland was the responsibility of the UK Government, and the financial powers to deliver compensation still lie with Westminster. It is entirely appropriate to therefore have a scheme delivered by a central body, as recommended by the inquiry. Over the years, there have simply been too many delays and denials impacting victims and their families. As Sir Brian Langstaff, he's absolutely spot on when he says in the interim report, and we've heard this a couple of times already today, but I make no apology for repeating it. Time without redress is harmful. No time must be wasted in delivering that redress. It is therefore imperative that the recommendations to widen the interim compensation payments are carried out, and this should be done before the final compensation scheme is set up. So will the UK Government accept the recommendation of the inquiry that the interim compensation payments be widened and delivered without delay? And finally, when will the Compensation Systems Independent Chair be appointed? Can we have a detailed timescale for this?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his comments, and can I also thank him particularly for him welcoming the concept of a central body. That was an area of not dispute, but I think there was a slightly different emphasis placed between Sir Robert's report and Sir Brian's report as whether it should be delivered locally through each of the 4 schemes or through a UK scheme. The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. This happened in the 70s and 80s, long before devolution, and there's a clear recommendation from Sir Brian, which I'm glad to hear that the Honourable Gentleman endorses. He raises 2 points about the interim compensation payment being widened and there being no delay in its implementation, and also regarding the appointments of individuals. This all depends on the government's response to each of those recommendations. The Honourable Gentleman will accept that. There are a number of things that could be done, though, to speed up the process. If we were to go down the route, if we were to agree with Sir Brian's recommendation to have an ALB, there are mechanisms whereby individuals could be appointed on an interim basis prior to the ALB being formally constituted. And all of this is in the mix as we work through our response to his report.
Father of the House, Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, the main views from the All-Party Group will come from the Right Honourable Lady. Can I say to the Minister, we recognise there's going to be a great deal of work that needs to go into this. As a minimum, can I put to him that he should come back to the House before the summer break to say how far the government has got in considering recommendations and which ones they're going to accept? Can I ask him if he'll set up a register so those who think they will have claims to make can both put their names forward and be able to receive updates from government directly rather than just through the mainstream media? And can I say to him that the voices of former Secretary of State for Health, that the totality has been a failure by the British state, and that the pain and suffering has gone on far too long, are words endorsed right across the House and by the country as a whole, and that we want the action that Sir Brian Langstaff has asked for, which is the scheme should be set up this year.
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and I thank him for recognising that there is a great deal of work to be done, which there is. I've already referred to the register point. Were we to adopt the recommendation, which is a very clear recommendation from Sir Brian, about an interim payment, which goes more widely than the last scheme, that does require a registration scheme, and I appreciate that that would take time itself, so that needs to be established at a very early stage if that recommendation is accepted. I will come back and update the House. I will do so as is appropriate. I hope that would certainly involve before the summer break.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for making the statement today? But really, after thousands have died, decades of campaigning, a 5-year public inquiry with over 500 people dying during that 5-year period, a review of compensation frameworks by Sir Robert Francis delivered to the government last February, a first interim report from Sir Brian Langstaff, and now a second interim report from Sir Brian Langstaff setting out the clear case for compensation. Enough is enough. Sir Brian Langstaff is very clear in his report. He says the scheme need not await the final report to begin work. It will clearly take political will to act quickly, but the circumstances here warrant it. So can the Minister explain to me and the thousands of people who will be watching this statement this afternoon, what exactly is the problem? Why isn't there the political will from this government to deliver justice to this group of people?
Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady. She has been a constant and incredibly effective champion for those affected and infected. It was about time, but it was this government that did institute this inquiry. We've made a huge amount of progress in having an inquiry, in having very clear recommendations on compensation coming from Sir Brian. We want to act at pace and we want to act swiftly, but it's also vital that this is done properly. So there is a huge amount of work. The nature of the report, the recommendations that Sir Brian makes, they are unprecedented for an unprecedented circumstance. But that does require detailed work and detailed analysis. We will bring forward a response as soon as we can. I say we are focused on the inquiry's conclusion. That doesn't preclude coming forward before that if we are able to do so and if we decide that that is the right course of action.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my voice to those thanking Sir Brian Langstaff and the whole team for the work that they've done? We all recognise the complexities of delivering a scheme that's effective. And I'm grateful to the Minister for repeatedly coming to this House and committing to come to the House again. But will he repeat from the dispatch box the moral case for compensation, which effectively has bound the government to act and to follow the recommendations for compensation, whilst of course it takes time to put that into practice? What it is vital, I think, for people to hear today is that, in principle, the government is going to make this happen, because for many years that commitment was not there, and it needs to be repeated now.
Minister.
Yes. My right honourable friend speaks with a great deal of knowledge on this subject, and I'm very grateful. I repeat this, as did he. I'm very grateful to Sir Brian for producing a comprehensive and thorough appraisal of what the compensation scheme should look like. We need to go through that in detail. As my right honourable friend would accept, it needs to be effective, it needs to work. But I'm pleased that he's given me the opportunity to reiterate what I said last December in this place, that we fully accept there is a moral case for compensation in this circumstance. Absolutely.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I've said in the debate in 2017, I remember as a young surgeon when this scandal began to break in the early 80s, 40 years ago. Yeah. My entire medical career has passed while people have been fighting for justice and recognition. Yeah. And dragging that out has added financial hardship to the suffering that people were already going through. So as the Honourable Lady from Hull North, I think, said, enough is enough. So the Minister has talked about how long things will take, and we recognise that. But when will they start? When will registration of bereaved parents and children start? When will the framework actually start, so that people can expect, as Sir Brian Langstaff called for, that they would see action this year, not waiting any longer?
Minister.
The Honourable Lady is very clear, as is Sir Brian in his report. So there's no dispute as to what Sir Brian is recommending. I can't give that commitment now. There are processes across government, as the Honourable Lady will understand. We are working at pace. We are going through the report in great detail. As I say, it's been a short period of time since that report landed with us and on all of us, and it is detailed, it is comprehensive, and it does need work. But we will be coming back to the Honourable Lady and to this House.
Sir Mike Penning.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first shadow portfolio I had in 2006 was the Shadow Health Minister with this portfolio. So I met many of the victims straight away that had been crying out. The 80s is when this started, but actually we didn't really know until into the 90s what was creating it. And I'm no expert on this, but that's the sort of thing that was coming forward. So I'm very proud that this government has done something that I promised as the Minister what we would do to those victims. But it's been taken too long. If there is a moral position for this, the victims out there are still suffering. Their loved ones are suffering if they've lost their loved one. And it's not just financial, it's actually broken people's hearts and minds as well. But their scepticism on this, I think, might be also fuelled by the fact that the government initiated an inquiry by Baroness Cumberledge into the Primrose debacle and disaster, and the government ignored that, literally ignored their own inquiry. So can the Minister understand the concerns of victims and other members of this House that are a little bit sceptical about delay?
Minister.
My right honourable friend he's absolutely right. This has been a long-term scandal. It started in the 70s and 80s. It has been many years to get to this stage. But the stage we've now got to is a High Court judge, a very distinguished High Court judge, has spent 5 years working through the circumstances. He is in an advanced stage with his inquiry, and he has produced a thorough report on compensation. As I've said to this House, and I will say it again, the moral case for compensation is fully accepted by the government. We do need to go through this and work through exactly what the implications are, which are multiple. And this is, as I said before, this is an unprecedented circumstance which requires unprecedented means of redress, and that is what's reflected in the report. But it does require work to go through it.
Clive Efford.
Deputy Speaker, we've had the report set out by Sir Brian Langstaff that says how the compensation should be delivered, the framework for delivering it. The Minister has said that the government is considering this recent report at pace, and he has also said that he wants to come back and update the House. So if we're moving at pace and we have all the detail in place that we need, when is he going to come back to the House?
Minister.
It will be a great pleasure to return to the House with more substance when I can. I thought it was important, even though we have only received this comprehensive report 8 working days ago, to give members of this House an opportunity to share their views on that interim report at the earliest possible opportunity. But the honourable gentleman will realise that it does require work to come back substantively to say which recommendations are being accepted and how we would be progressing it.
James Morris.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Minister's statement, but would he agree with me that, notwithstanding the complexity that he outlined in relation to the compensation scheme, that 2 things should happen? One is that the government should move urgently to the design of the compensation scheme, and secondly, in the design of the compensation scheme, there should be engagement with victims or the groups representing those victims to make sure that there is alignment between the compensation scheme and the expectation of victims moving forward.
Minister.
I totally understand where my honourable friend is coming from. It is critical that we produce that answers provided to in response to this report are ones that have that are readily understood and have the buy-in of all those who've suffered so grievously as a result of these scandals. I'm very keen to engage with the victims. I would also say that Sir Brian, I think, has been doing an exceptional job in ensuring that he fully understands and speaks and takes on board the comments made by the victims and engages with them. It is, I think, impossible for any of us who have not suffered from this ourselves personally to understand fully the anguish that those victims have been put through. I think Sir Brian has done his utmost to reflect that in the report that is produced.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And yes, I'd also like to thank the Minister for coming here today and pay tribute to Sir Brian and the work that he has done. Not long after I was first elected in 2017, I received a letter from a constituent whose family had suffered as a result of the infected blood scandal, and what they had been through was heartbreaking. And although progress has been made, and we have the interim report, we are now 6 years further on, and they are no further on in receiving compensation. So as others have said today, can we please get on with it and ensure that these families' suffering is put to an end?
Minister.
Look, I totally understand where the Honourable Lady is coming from, that we all have constituents who are in that situation. There are tens of thousands of people who are affected across the whole of the UK. We want to do so at pace. We also want to do so with the scheme that is, that any scheme we adopt must be effective and must work and must be appropriate. So there is work ongoing. We will get there and report back to the House our response to those recommendations that Sir Brian has made.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's intense focus on this, but can I join members from across the House, not on a personal basis, because I think the Minister is one of the best in the government, but on behalf of my constituents, that this has taken a long time, and of course it has to be thorough, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to Sir Brian and Sir Robert, but can the Minister assure the House that their difference of opinion about how the compensation may or may not be delivered, whether nationally or through the devolved administrations, will not cause further delay, that post the final report being published, there won't then be a further consultation on whether it's devolved or national, and in particular on children affected who've lost loved ones and parents, whether there could be interim payments more quickly, because some of them are really suffering financially, let alone the loss of their parents. And on the 5 categories, he mentioned social impact. Clearly the loss of a parent is the biggest social impact of all.
Minister.
To reassure my honourable friend, when I referred in my statement to areas where there were different nuances, different views presented by Sir Robert and Sir Brian, I don't want that to be overstated, and I wouldn't have wished to have done so. Sir Brian had the benefit of Sir Robert's report. I think he would say that he found it extremely useful that study was undertaken, so he was able to consider Sir Robert's report before coming up with his own recommendations. But we must not allow any difference between the two, which is mainly of nuance, to get in the way of our proper and full consideration of Sir Brian's report. The honourable gentleman also refers, as of other honourable members, to interim payments. All I can say is that there is a very clear recommendation from Sir Brian. We are working through all of this, and we will be returning to the House in due course, having had an opportunity to review fully those recommendations.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent's father died following infected factor VIII treatment. The family did not feel they could grieve openly because of the stigma around HIV and AIDS at the time of his death. My constituent has told me that although a compensation payment would not bring back their father, it would finally give the family a sense of closure. Does the Minister accept the symbolic importance of compensation payments, and will the Government now commit to including children who have lost a parent in the scope of the compensation scheme as recommended by Sir Brian Langstaff?
Minister.
I think one of the very, very worst aspects of many dreadful aspects of this scandal is the stigma to which the Honourable Lady refers. To go as a child through the circumstances of being extremely ill, but for your parents to then be worried about the stigma and moving house or moving school or moving work, it is deeply, for those of us shocked reading it now, and in many cases we're 20, 30, 40 years on from the circumstances, it is an absolute hell these people went through, with the stigma laid on top of dreadful circumstances. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for reminding us of that. I'm afraid I'm not in a position, though, to make piecemeal comments regarding the recommendation that Sir Brian has made. I think it is, as I've said before, it's vital that he produce this report. It's a very comprehensive report, and we do need to go through it thoroughly and then produce a response in due course when we've had a chance to do so.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. You know, the length of this scandal can be summed up with the fact that my predecessor spent 18 years pursuing certain cases, and I've spent the last 8 years pursuing the same cases to try and bring them to resolution. Now, the Minister rightly says there's work to be done following these recommendations, but what timescales has he set for that work to be done in terms of them being able to prepare a response, and also what work has been done in preparation for potential recruitment of people to actually deal with many of these claims via the structure proposed? And from experience with another complex compensation scheme stretching over decades, that is far easier said than done.
Minister.
My honourable friend raises a good point. There is work was undertaken prior to the release of the second interim report based on Sir Robert's original study, which helps us considerably. We're now working at pace to go through the changes, but also going through what the government's stance will be overall. But we are working at pace. I'm not going to set a timeline to it, but we are. On recruitment, Martin Friend raises a good point, that if a ALB route is the way forward, there's no time needs to be lost in finding a route for good people who've got expertise to be brought into the process prior to the formal establishment of an ALB, if that's the route we go down.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The gut-wrenching truth of the matter is that people are decaying and dying while his government dithers and delays. The people who are concerned in this will have heard nothing new today from the Minister. So can he, for their benefit, so that they know he's fighting for them, confirm that he believes the recommendations to widen the scope of the payment should be agreed? And will he fight for those compensation payments to be made this year to the people affected?
Minister.
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that it would be wrong to characterise the circumstance today as there being one of no progress. The fact that Sir Brian Langstaff has produced his report is a huge step forward. As I say, it is fantastic that he has come forward with the second interim report specifically on compensation. I already accepted on behalf of the government, I speak on behalf of the government, on behalf of the government I accepted the moral case for compensation back in December. We now need to go through what Sir Brian has written, which has been the culmination of many years' work, and then take decisions on that, and then come back to the House.
Jonathan Dinockley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the government's clear determination, as shown by the Minister today, to move faster towards a just resolution to this sad and terrible scandal. As an MP representing a Huntingdon family devastated by this affair, who were long concerned at the inability to engage with ministers, will my right honourable friend now confirm that ongoing engagement with victims' families will take place with proper understanding for their tragic plight?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I can confirm to my right honourable friend, yes, if there's... I previously met, I think most of us in our constituency capacities have been aware of the victims of this dreadful scandal. Through the Right Honourable Lady in the APPG, I had the privilege of meeting representatives of those infected and affected, and I'm more than willing to do so again as we continue to progress our work on this.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is absolutely correct. There's tens of thousands of people fixed to their televisions today expecting a resolution to this inquiry. They're disappointed. I'll tell you why they're disappointed, Minister. Because they haven't got time on their side. There's hundreds have already died, and there's more dying on a week-by-week basis. They haven't got time on their side. So we need to ensure that the government respond fully to this report. We need to ensure that the government set out a clear timetable on actions for this report. Remember, there's people dying as the government are dithering and delaying.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right, alas, that the victims of this continue to die. Actually, Sir Brian makes a comment in his second interim report that we don't necessarily know the full scale of the medical impact of what went on in the 70s and 80s, and conditions are, in some cases, worsening. So the point is absolutely well made. The honourable gentleman says we must respond fully. We must, and we will do so when we have done the work that is required.
Damien Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And, I welcome on behalf of my constituents affected by this the sensitivity in which the government has been dealing with it. However, the lack of urgency is undermining that goodwill on behalf of victims and their families, and it's letting victims and their families down every single day. How long is it going to be between accepting one of these points and implementing them? Would it not just be easy to implement them now? And I think listening to members and the way they've spoken today, the best thing to do would be to implement them and work on getting this support to families as soon as possible.
Minister.
Thank you, gentlemen. There is urgency, I can assure him, in terms of our response. As I say, it was 8 working days ago that the report was produced. We are working at pace to go through it. We will continue to do so. We need to determine our view on all of those recommendations, but that does not necessarily preclude us taking individual steps between now and the conclusion of the inquiry, and we will continue to work.
Jessica Morden.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Please don't delay this any longer. I know the Minister will say it's complicated. He said that at the last statement, but the government's known about this for a long, long time and should have been preparing. And bereaved families like the Smiths in my constituency, whose case I've been raising for 18 years now, need interim payments now. Does the Minister really get that those who have waited years for justice and for redress just can't afford to wait any longer?
Minister.
I'm familiar with the constituency case of the Honourable Lady. She's raised it many, many times, and I'm familiar with the sad story, which is one of so many around this House. I cannot add to what I've said earlier. I recognise the strength of feeling in this House and in the infected and affected communities. We absolutely do. And I'm grateful that we have, with Sir Brian's report, a really thorough analysis for us to work through.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister accept that the uncertainty of when the Government will fully respond to this report risks damaging people's mental health? I'm thinking of a number of constituents who've contacted me that there's a real impact on mental health, and so can he set out an actual timetable, or does he have a timetable in his head for action? And does he also accept the principle of making interim payments to bereaved parents and children, many of whom gave up their working careers, many of whom did not reach their educational and academic potential because of the years they were caring for their loved ones?
Minister.
On the timetable, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are determined to be in the best possible place to respond to the inquiry when it concludes. But as I've said to other honourable members, that doesn't preclude us doing other steps earlier if that is what we determine to do as a government. We are working at pace to go through all of the implications of the report. On the second point that the honourable gentleman raises, look, I can't go through individual recommendations at this stage. He will appreciate why, but I do recognise the extremely strong case that Sir Brian has made for a number of those who have been affected, including carers who have given up a great deal to support others.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of my constituents contracted hepatitis C from a botched blood bag in the 1980s. Her daughter wrote to me last year, and I quote, she said, "I'm furious that you have grudgingly decided to pay interim compensation after she finally could fight no longer, 7 weeks after she died. In the meantime, I'm left with grief and nothing else to show for all the misery. In addition to all the horrors that my constituent and her mother went through, the daughter is also not eligible for compensation as she's not a partner of the bereaved. Could I ask the Minister, does he think this is fair?"
Minister.
Look, I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of the Honourable Lady's constituent. It was a significant step forward and a positive step forward that the government accepted in full Sir Brian's recommendation about those infected and bereaved partners and brought forward the £100,000 of compensation that was paid last October. It's tragic that, for the reasons stated earlier in relation to the scale of loss ongoing from this scandal, that there will have been individuals who missed out on those compensation because of their death, even between the announcement and the payment of the compensation, which is, and I really feel for the family of the Honourable Lady's constituent. The Honourable Lady specifically referred to payments to beyond the interim payments that were made last year. Sir Brian has made a very specific recommendation on that. We're not responding to it today, but it is one of the many recommendations that we're working through.
Alison Toulis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent's father died in England in the late 1970s, and she tells me that she is his only surviving next of kin. So can the Minister confirm where my constituent and many others like her will obtain the compensation that they are clearly due, and what proof will be required to access it, given the notorious related scandal around medical records? Because bereaved people in these circumstances don't need more barriers, they need compensation after all they've suffered.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she raises an extremely good point in terms of the evidence to be produced to access any future compensation scheme. It was a minor point of difference between the two reports, between Sir Robert and Sir Brian, in terms of the evidential test, but everyone is very aware that given the history of records not being available and the length of time that has been passed, well, Sir Brian has been very clear that an appropriate approach must be taken to a compensation scheme if it is established along those lines to ensure that it doesn't preclude people who have got no means of showing their ability to access the scheme because of factors completely beyond their control.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a point that's been made by so many colleagues in the chamber already, but children of those lost as a consequence of the scandal feel particularly unseen and unheard by the progress that's been made so far. So can the Minister assure them that there will be a focus for this government when recognising not only their loss, but also in delivering compensation payments through the scheme to them as a priority?
Minister.
Thank the Honourable Lady. As I said before, children are a particularly harrowing aspect of this. Sir Brian has made very specific recommendations. We're not responding to those today, but we are working through them, and we will continue to do so, I can assure the Honourable Lady.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, I express sympathy and solidarity with my constituents who have been affected as well. Does the Minister accept, as I think the questions are demonstrating, that the longer it takes to implement, the more complicated it is going to become, and not least because of the question of estates and surviving relatives becomes increasingly into play? So does the Government recognise the need to confirm the individuals that are due compensation and then pay them as quickly as possible?
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman will appreciate that is exactly the process that we're going through. It's working through Sir Brian's report, where he makes specific recommendations, including the eligibility of the states. He recommends that the estates of those infected should be included with any scheme. But these are all, he's not wrong in saying that these are all complicated. The risk is becoming more complicated, and we want to make certain that we make progress and come to a resolution in our consideration of that report.
Catherine West.
Deputy Speaker, when I entered this House, my young constituent was in the nursery and we all hoped that this would be resolved quickly. She then graduated to primary school and now she's about to go into secondary school. The loss of her father was absolutely devastating to this terrible infected blood scandal. Two questions. One is, will she receive compensation? Because there seems to be a question about whether children will get compensation. And secondly, the psychological research is only being done now to look at the support needs. How can it be that after this many years that the research is only beginning now to look on commissioning a bespoke service? And will he apologise for that specific delay?
Minister.
I can't confirm the details of what would be within a compensation scheme if that comes forward, simply because that is the work we are undertaking now. I recognise the urgency represented by the Honourable Lady. In terms of the psychological needs, there are different progress has been made around the United Kingdom. There are schemes established in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. There is £900 available every year in England, but there is being work undertaken now to ensure that that a tailored scheme would be absolutely appropriate, and that is ongoing, and we expect to hear over the next few months as to what the answer will be on the psychological scheme. That's something which has been conducted by my ministerial colleagues in the Department of Health.
Anna Bardell.
much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am afraid that it is simply not good enough. It is like Groundhog Day for our constituents who have been impacted by the contaminated blood scandal. And it's not good enough to come to the dispatch box when there's been so much time and so many reports with so little to say to our constituents. Constituents like mine, Vera Gaskin and Linda Cannon. Linda emailed me last night to say the consequences for me have been devastating. My life has been ruined beyond belief. I lost my husband 37 years under horrendous circumstances which were hard to bear. Decades have gone by, Madam Deputy Speaker, and nothing has been done. We welcome the reports. Of course we welcome the reports, but the Minister must not use those to hide behind and kick the can down the road for those victims. There's clearly cross-party support for taking those interim measures, so why doesn't he get on and do it?
Minister.
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. This has been going on for decades. That was why it was vital that the inquiry was set up as it was in 2017 by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead. This is a significant moment in the course of that inquiry. The production of an interim report, specifically dealing with compensation, was delivered 8 working days ago. It's extraordinarily important that that's been made. It is a thorough report. We need to go through it. So I recognise the determination from all sides of this House to see this to resolution. I recognise the frustration of the Honourable Lady, and she's reflecting the frustration of her constituents and many others, I know. But it was only during the Easter recess that this report was established. We need to work through it, and we need to come back to this House when we've done that work.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's statement is incredibly light on substance or actual commitments, and there is no reason that the government could not begin verifying and registering those affected in preparation for the publication of the final report for the swift delivery of compensation. The Minister's own statement reiterates the need for pace, and yet there's no commitment to even beginning this or a vague timeline when this might be begun at a time when victims are dying every week and we're in a sustained cost of living crisis. Justice delayed is justice denied. Why is the government causing further unnecessary delays with their inaction? Have the victims and their families not already suffered more than enough?
Minister.
I recognise the determination of the Honourable Lady. It is fair to say that in terms of registering those who may be eligible for a future compensation scheme, those registered would have varied between the Sir Robert Francis study and the report produced by Sir Brian Langstaff. So we do need to do the work. We do need to ensure that we have absolute clarity on which approach we're taking, and that is announced, and there is clarity for the victims. But I absolutely commit, there will be no unnecessary delays, as the Honourable Lady puts it. There is, however, a need and a necessity to do the work to make certain that we have an effective and proper and appropriate response to what is a very thorough report.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have a constituent called Brian Ross, and I have his permission to use his name here. His family have been known to my family for generations. He received contaminated blood in the 1980s, and like so many others, is left susceptible to cancer. And I've sat down with him and I've talked to him about the stress, the fear, the really black fear that surrounds him and his family. For Brian Ross's sake, can I ask the Minister to make sure that nothing impedes some scheme for him? We don't know how long he's got. And in working with the victims, their legal representatives, and indeed the Minister mentioned the devolved institutions, let's make sure that nothing is a glitch in all this. And please do this for Brian Ross's sake.
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman speaks from the heart, and I totally recognise the issues that he raises on behalf of his constituent, Mr. Ross. I can only reiterate that we've come a long way on this subject. 2017, this was established. We now have a thorough report specifically on compensation. That is a major step forward from where we were at any stage prior to 8 days ago. And we will do all the work and ensure that we come back with a proper and full and appropriate response.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent's son received infected blood in the 80s, and the trauma and cost on that family is incalculable, as described by many other MPs here today. Time is not on the side of many of these families. I'm going to ask the Paymaster General a specific question, because he seems to avoid giving any specific facts of what's going to happen now. Is it not unreasonable to have a compensation scheme up and running by the end of this year?
Minister.
That is what Sir Brian recommends. So Sir Brian believes that it is possible to achieve that. We need to work through and produce our response to Sir Brian. I'm not in a position to confirm timings as yet or what our response will be. But the Honourable Lady is absolutely right in saying that Sir Brian Langstaff recommends that we should be in a position to put to get a scheme in place by the end of the year. We need to do the work. We need to be able to come back to this House.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Could I first of all argue in favour of the importance of the independence of the compensation scheme? I think many, perhaps not all, people here would argue that the Windrush compensation scheme, for example, was hindered by its lack of arm's length from the Home Office. And secondly, could I also ask, in anticipation that the Government does accept recommendations about the scope of the compensation scheme, could he look to use information from the infected blood support schemes to start registering and verifying those who will qualify right now in order to save some time further down the line?
Minister.
Look, I thank the Honourable Gentleman. We are, as part of the work I've alluded to, looking at a whole range of compensation schemes, and they come in different shapes and sizes. There's been none from the Windrush he refers to Armed Forces Compensation Scheme, some of the MOG tribunal work, but there is the solution of an ALB wholly separate from government, wholly separate from government and paying out the schemes. It was an innovative approach to an unprecedented issue, and that's something which we are working through. That would have the independence that the Honourable Gentleman refers to. That does bring with it consequences as well in terms of accountability for expenditure. So we just need to. We're working through all of those issues. He's wise to raise them. On the point of view of registering potential beneficiaries, the current infected blood schemes, I believe, were the basis for the payment last year of interim payments to those infected and bereaved partners. I think Sir Brian is very clear in saying that for the scheme to widen, we would need a new registration scheme that goes further than that and recognises others who've been affected but are not included within the infected blood scheme. But it's a good point the Honourable Gentleman raises.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his statement, and especially commend the Honourable Lady for Kingston Hull North, I think it is, for her dogged determination on this issue at every case. I think every one of us who has constituents who suffer from this contaminated blood owe that Honourable Lady many thanks, so we thank her publicly in this chamber today. I'm very pleased of the news that ahead of the final report, the Chairman has issued the recommendation that compensation is given. Minister, with compensation for health issues, the reality for many is this, that each week that passes is worsening health, more care needed, and the compensation would greatly enhance the quality of end of life for some of these people who we know are coming to that stage. So the Minister, I said very respectfully, he is a Minister with compassion and understands the issue. So will the Minister consent to fast-tracking this recommendation whilst awaiting the rest of the report, and particularly for those end-of-life claimants?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman, indeed all honourable members who have contributed to this statement. He makes a very powerful point, as so often, and it's a powerful point that comes out from Sir Brian Langstaff's report. We will do the work. We will come back to this place having done so. There is a powerful case being made by Sir Brian, but the work needs to be undertaken. We do need to do that properly, and I look forward to coming back to the House in due course when we have made more progress.